I'm a historian, and I've spent years tracing single choices that toppled nations. This one starts with a potato cut into three. That eye is a bud. Plant it, and the plant that grows is not the child of that potato. It is that potato again, the same one, copied. So here is the honest question I keep coming back to, the one I've spent years sitting with. What happens when every piece you plant, season after season, in one field and then in a whole country, is the same plant repeated? People will tell you the potato saved Europe, and that is true as far as it goes. They will also tell you the potato betrayed Ireland, and that half of the story almost nobody tells straight. But the potato did neither of those things. What did it was a choice. Plant one copy over and over until a whole nation stood on a single plant. That is not a story about a vegetable. It is a story about a bet. Farmers in the Andes were growing potatoes roughly 8,000 years ago, longer ago than the pyramids and longer than most of our vegetables. This is groundwork, where the land, the history, and plain hard-won sense meet. To understand why one clone could feed a country and then starve it, go back to those Andes mountains, where the potato was never one plant at all. High in the Andes, on terraces built of stone, farmers were digging potatoes out of cold mountain ground, while most of the crops we eat today did not yet exist. Look at the dates plainly. As already said, that goes back some 8,000 years, and in all that time, no farmer up here ever grew just the one kind. Here, the potato was never one plant. It was thousands, each one a little different. Now, here is the part that matters most, the part worth carrying home. Those Andean farmers kept thousands of different potato varieties going at once, the way a family keeps a dozen different tools in the shed instead of one. Some tubers were long and dark, some small and yellow. Some grew high where the frost bit hard, and some lower where the rain came heavy. A field was not one plant repeated. It was a whole crowd of them, each one with its own weakness and its own strength. Think about what that crowd does for you. When a cold snap took the varieties that could not stand the cold, the ones that could still stood. When a blight found the varieties it could sicken, the ones it could not still fed the family. No single trouble could empty the whole field, because the field was never a single plant. That is the wisdom this story carries out of the Andes. Abundance as protection. Hold on to it, because the trouble comes later, when a whole country plants just one. Now, walk down to the harbor at Seville. It is the 1570s, and Spanish galleons are tied at the stone quay, their crews hauling crates up out of the holds and setting them on the warm dockside. In some of those crates sits a plain brown tuber that has crossed the whole Atlantic from the Andes. Nobody on that quay knows what it will one day feed or what it will one day cost. Spanish ships carried the potato back across the ocean in the 1570s, and from there it spread quietly across Europe over the next 2 centuries. It spread field by field, cottage by cottage, with no announcement. A garden here, a field there, a poor family that found it grew where wheat would not, and kept more people fed through a hard winter. No fanfare, no single day anyone marked on a calendar. By the 1770s, the potato had crossed most of Europe. Ground that fed a family on grain could feed several on potatoes, and the plant asked little in return. Remember what those Andean farmers knew, though. The field that keeps thousands of kinds is the field no single trouble can empty. Europe was taking the crop. It had not yet taken the wisdom that came with it. Now watch 2 men force the issue. Starting in 1756, Frederick the Great of Prussia ordered his peasants to plant potatoes, sending soldiers out to the fields to enforce it in the places where they refused. Farmers who did not trust the strange route found a soldier standing over the furrow until the seed pieces went in the ground. That was how the crop took Prussia, not by choice, but by order. Across the border in France, the work went the other way. A former prisoner of war turned scientist, Antoine Parmentier, spent years talking his country into eating potatoes, one dinner at a time. He hosted meals for the king himself, setting a dish of potatoes on the royal table so the court would see it eaten and follow. One man used soldiers, the other used the king's own supper. Parmentier won in the end, and within a few years, his way of cooking and planting the potato had spread clear across France. Both were pushing the same crop into the same century, and it worked on a scale hard to picture now. The potato is widely credited as one big reason Europe's people roughly doubled between the 1700s and the 1800s. Ground that fed a family on grain now fed several on the tuber, and more fed children lived to grow their own fields. The rise was real, a crop pushed into Europe by order and by argument, and a continent that grew because of it. Every one of those new fields planting the very same thing. Now cross the water to Ireland and watch the numbers climb. Around the middle of the 1700s, about 3 million people lived on that island. By the early 1840s, there were 8.2 million. 5 million more mouths in under 100 years, and they were fed mostly on one crop. The potato had done in Ireland exactly what it had done across the rest of Europe, only more so. The rise looked like the same triumph, carried further than anywhere else. Walk out into a field in County Mayo in those years, and you would see the reason, going into the ground row by row. A farmer works his way down the furrow, dropping seed pieces into the dark soil, small stone cottages standing off in the pale, overcast light behind him. Each piece he plants is a cutting off a potato already grown, not a seed grown from a flower. It comes up as an exact copy of the plant it was cut from. That is how nearly the whole crop was raised, one variety planted over and over. That variety had a name. They called it the lumper. Most of the Irish crop was that one kind, raised from cuttings year on year, genetically closer to one plant wearing a million disguises than to a field of different plants. 8 million people, and the ground under nearly all of them growing the very same thing. That is not a field. That is one plant, and one plant can carry one trouble to every last row of it. Then, in 1845, something arrived that the lumper had never had to answer before. A water mold called Phytophthora infestans arrived in Ireland. It was no fungus, but an oomycete, a water mold nobody knew how to stop. It landed on a country planted almost entirely with one defenseless clone. No other variety stood in the next field to resist it. Nothing different anywhere for it to fail against. Every plant was the lumper, and the lumper had no answer. On a cut seed potato, the mold blooms dark across the flesh in a day. In the row, the leaves go black and rot where they stand. The lumpers stood in every field at once, and the blight only had to learn one plant to ruin all of them. The blight ran its course in a few short years. When it was done, Ireland could count what betting on one clone had cost. By the end, roughly 1 million people had died. That was about 1 in every 8 or 9 people alive in Ireland at the time. Look down any road and picture every 9th person gone, and you have the size of it. Another 1 to 2 million left the island for good. Put it together, of the 8 million who had been there in the 40s, close to 3 million were dead or gone in just a few years. They crowded onto ships and went out across the ocean, most of them never to come back. Some of those ships lost so many passengers to fever and hunger along the way that people gave them a name. They called them coffin ships, plain and earned. Here is the part that sits heaviest, and it is not a matter of the weather or the mold. All through the worst of it, ships kept sailing out of Irish ports loaded with food, less than the years before, but never stopping. Grain, butter, and cattle went aboard and went to sea. That food grew in the same country where the people were starving, but it was not theirs. It belonged to the landlords, and it was bound for markets that could pay. The tenants who raised it stood on the quay and watched it leave. The bet had come due. Plant one clone across a whole country, and one trouble can empty every last row of it. The famine did the emptying, but the ships going out full, while the fields lay black, are what closed the account. Walk into any grocery store today and pick up a banana. Almost every one on the shelf is the same variety, the Cavendish. It grows the same way the lumper grew, one plant cloned over and over until a whole field is that single plant repeated end to end. Right now, a fungus is moving through Cavendish plantations, row after row. This one really is a fungus, the way one trouble found every lumper. The Cavendish is not the first banana to carry the whole world on its back. Before it, there was the Gros Michel, sweeter by most accounts, and it was the banana the world grew for decades. Then a disease very much like this one reached the Gros Michel groves and worked through them until there was almost nothing left to ship. The Cavendish became the world's banana only because it could stand up to that first disease, and because the one it stood in for was already gone. So the road runs the same way twice. One clone planted everywhere, one trouble that finds it. And the trouble does not wait to be invited. So here's the whole thing back in one hand. Not a single seed potato this time, cut from one clone and copied down the row, but 3 of them, each a different variety, each shaped a little different, ready to go into the same garden bed. The lesson sits in plain sight. Growers who learned it plant 2 or 3 kinds, not one, and pick what resists blight in their own ground so one bad week or one disease can't take it all. Cut the tops off early at the first sign of blight before the trouble works down into the ground. And they move the potatoes to fresh ground every 3 or 4 years so the blight in the soil cannot lie there waiting for the next crop. That is what a whole country learned the hard way. The same choice that emptied every field in Ireland is the one you are making over your own bed, only smaller. And the fix that would have spared a nation costs you nothing to remember. So ask yourself, if your own bed carried only one kind, would you know it until the year it failed?